course we're after Saddam Hussein. Bin Laden. He's.
January 2001. The Bush administration orders the FBI and intelligence agencies to back off investigations involving the bin Laden family, including 2 of Osama bin Laden's relatives, who were living, guess where, in Falls Church, Virginia, right next to CIA headquarters.
When he was already America's most wanted criminal, he reportedly spent 2 weeks in the American hospital in Dubai, was treated by an American doctor, and visited by the local CIA agent.
We have not seen one piece of evidence that links Osama bin Laden directly to the planning stages of September 11th.
This failure to provide proof was later said to be unnecessary because bin Laden, in a video allegedly found in Afghanistan, admitted responsibility for the attacks. This confession is now widely cited as proof. But the man in this video has darker skin, fuller cheeks, and a broader nose than the Osama bin Laden of all other videos. We again seem to have planted evidence.
In 1976, Osama's older brother Salim bin Laden hired a man in Texas by the name of Jim Bath to handle all the investments in the United States for the bin Laden family. Jim Bath also happens to be a personal, almost lifelong friend and former Air National Guard pilot with George W. Bush. The connections between the Bushes and the bin Ladens become much more clear when George Herbert Walker Bush made trips to Saudi Arabia in 1998 and 2000 to meet with the bin Laden family on behalf of a company called the Carlyle Group.
In the early 1960s, the federal government needed a pretext to invade Cuba.
The Pentagon had an operation called Operation Northwoods, and it was on the table that our military would attack certain cities within the United States and make it look like Cuba did it to justify an invasion of Cuba.
So the idea was to have U.S. personnel from the CIA and other places secretly create terrorism in the United States. The documents actually said people would be shot on American streets, bombs would be blown up. And again, all this, the evidence would be laid to point the finger at Castro.
The federal government proposed blowing up airliners full of Americans, saying the casualty list in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of indignation.
They had a very complex plan where they were going to take an aircraft and load it with CIA people that looked like college students, have it take off from an airport in Miami with a lot of publicity, and then it would quickly, after it got into the air, land at a secret CIA base. At that same time, an identical plane would take off from that CIA base, except this plane would be empty, and it'd be remotely piloted from the ground. It was a drone plane that would be very similar to the passenger plane that had just taken off.
Except we want to hijack jets by remote control, crash them, and blame it on the Soviet Union and Cuba. Now, that was decades ago.
If they would do it in the 60s, they'll do it again.
It never got put into effect, but the fact that you can get all the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the senior military officials in the U.S. government, signing off on a plan that outrageous is extraordinary.
In the plan, they elaborated on how they could bomb Washington, D.C. and blame it on Cuba. Attack Marines at Guantanamo Bay using U.S. Army soldiers dressed up as Cubans. Or, they said, just like the sinking of the Maine to get into the Spanish-American War, we could blow up a ship again. Here they are admitting the problem reaction solution system and how effective it is to motivate the American people to get them behind a war.
The most puzzling involved the terrorist attack on 9/11. Now, statistically speaking, some of these have to be coincidences, but others violate the odds outright. Over and over again, 9/11 appeared in everything from movies to comic books. And what about the FBI's failed attempt in 1993 to bring down Tower 1? Why did none of the artists see that as the future? Why did they universally envision the top of the buildings being damaged rather than the bottom? Did they know the first attack would fail? Was it insider knowledge, or was it something more? Surely the 9/11 inside job plan isn't as old as 1976. With symbols, the Illuminati piss on every tree they pass, so how could they conceal the plan for so long? And if they did conceal the plan for so long, why did they even bother bombing Tower 1 in 93 if they knew it would fail and the tower's eventual destruction involved damage to the top? In my opinion, these synchronicities stem from one of two sources.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so glad that you could join us today for this Wednesday, July 25th, 2001 broadcast. And I'm going to put the call out that you call the White House and tell them, look, we've seen the news stories that you've wanted to blow things up, that you have blown things up, and that you're saying that 4 million of us are going to die and we need martial law and the Associated Press at one of your little drills you had. And that we're aware of who the terrorists are if you pull this. I want you to call these major newspapers. I want you to find out these statements were true by the White House about preparing for martial law. And I want you to let them know that if there is any terrorism, we know who to blame. The point is, if any terrorism comes, it's from this government. And if there was an outside threat like a bin Laden, who was a known CIA asset in the 80s, running the Mujahideen war, and whose family builds all the military bases over in Saudi Arabia right now, and sits on the board of Iridium Satellite, he's the boogeyman they need in this Orwellian phony system. I want the White House numbers up there now. A big part of this solution, after you research all the government terrorism and check out what I'm saying is true, call the White House and tell them, we know the government's planning terrorism. We know Oklahoma City and World Trade Center was terrorism. We know the Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted to blow up airliners, Baltimore Sun. If you do it, we're going to blame you because we know who's up to it. Or if you let some terrorist group do it, like the World Trade Center, we know who to blame. And you could save the planet.
Now, Alex Jones didn't have insider knowledge in the classical sense. He was just reading the trends. But here's an example of real insider knowledge.
What is scenario 12D?